we also know, and we know from a number of sources, that African people pray before sex. We know that they consider sex to be a sacred thing because they consider procreation to be a sacred thing because procreation, they model themselves upon the universe, and the primary motive force in the universe for African people is procreation. It's creation. Building something like that. The word creation, creator. So when we logically look at the values that African people have that have been outlined, highlighted, discussed in the books, and we can separate the wheat from the chaff, and we can remove the European opinion from what Europeans have recorded, and European opinion from what Africans, traditional Africans, recorded in many instances. When we can find that core, then we can begin to move in that direction. Now, I would argue that the only way that we are really going to get to there as a people is through the removal of the bad. So it's almost like through the process of elimination that you get to the core, what good sex, what sacred sex was to African people. So there are like a number of books that I would say that people need to look at and read, and then go further if they want to. Ron Nefer Amen's, I've forgotten the name of his book. Yes. There are a number of books that I really suggest that people
and this is Baba Barudi's book, Complementarity, right here.
Which is one of the books that I really suggest that people look at when they're trying to get back to what should be considered African sex. All the books by Baba Fukiao, even though they may not address the topic of sex itself, even though in self-healing power and therapy does address it in terms of pregnancy and how women should be treated and how babies should or would be treated in that context.
And how the mind state should be, and even before you enter sex, like you said, praying.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I can't find, but there's a book by Ron Nefer Amen that has to do with has to do with couples, and it's the only book that he really wrote about couples. So it's about this thickness.
Yeah. I can't think of the title.
But you need to pick up books like that and then start going through, when you finish with the book and you finish studying the book, and go through the bibliography and start finding other sources that lead you there. We need to read about our traditions, because if you're talking about even one aspect of a culture that you're trying to follow or find the direction of in yourself, then you have to understand this culture. You can't just understand, read Facing Mount Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, and say, okay, well, he says this. No, you have to understand a cultural framework, and from that cultural framework, you can understand what is right and what is wrong, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So we have to understand, or at least study to a significant degree, traditional, uncontaminated African culture. African culture before, as it existed before the Arab invasion, African culture as it existed before the European invasion, African culture as it existed before the Asian invasion. Because we had a culture that kept us intact and sane for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And if we're going to be who we're supposed to be, we have to study that. Yes. Every aspect of that. Because looking at the education part of it, that's going to tell me something about correct sexual behavior for Africans. Looking at the political context, that's going to tell me, because that's dealing with relationships. That's going to tell me something about how men and women related to each other. And the language, absolutely. The language. Who was that? The Kemites said the Greek language is a language of noise, language of confusion and chaos. So that tells you something, and it fits the way they treated each other. It fit the way that they dealt with each other sexually. So you have a culture that's now taking us toward the idea that in sexual behavior, you're supposed to slam your lips into this other person's with a speed that would knock out people's teeth. You're supposed to tackle this person and slam them up against the wall and drop kick them onto the floor and tackle them and fight over who's going to be on top. So the sexual aspect, it matches the language. It matches all of the aspects of their culture, a violent, aggressive, will to power culture.